Hello everybody, this is Talon with another Nutrition Tier List, a series where I break down all the options in a given food group and rank them based on how nutritious they are and how good they are for your health. Today we're beginning what I'm considering Season 2 of Nutrition Tier Lists, and I figured what better way to bring that in than to do the official sequel to my first tier list. So this is Meats Part 2. Now we all know meat, the crux of many people's diets, often the centerpiece of a meal, and the topic of a fair bit of controversy, but I'm not here to talk about that. No, I'm here to talk about nutrition, and meat as a food group does have a lot to provide in that department. All of the natural meats are rich in protein, arguably the most essential nutrient that we've talked about many times here. If you clicked on this video hoping for an in-depth explanation on how it helps your body, I am happy to disappoint you and even happier to redirect you to a different video that will do a better job of that. Many meats are also high in fat, another important type of nutrient that'll be better discussed in other videos. Meats as a whole are also a solid source of many essential micronutrients, including the B vitamins, crucially vitamin B12, as well as copper, heme iron, phosphorus, potassium, selenium, and zinc. Now, in the first meat tier list, I covered the most popular and accessible meats. However, I've been told countless times since then that does not necessarily make them the best. Thus, the demand for a part 2, where we're going to be covering a lot more game meats, as well as just less common picks that I didn't get around to in the first video. Another notable difference is that in this one, I will not be talking about organ meats or seafood. There's already a seafood tier list that's going to be getting a part 2 as well, and you guys made it very clear that you wanted a separate organ meats video. But enough about future videos, let's focus on this list. Looking at the tiers for this video, we're going to be comparing the nutrient content and benefits of each meat against any shortcomings or health concerns that they may have. Keep in mind that these lists are ranked independent of each other, so an A-tier meat may not equate to an A-tier fruit or an A-tier vegetable. The only exception will be that I'm going to try and stay as consistent as possible with the first meat tier list. I recognize that for meats in particular, there's a few ways to judge how useful they actually are, and I want to remain consistent in my criteria. And that basically can be wrapped up in pure nutrient content, both by weight and per calorie, and how effective it is for building of muscle, weight loss, and athletic performance. All numerical nutritional information on this list and across this series will be based on 100 grams of the individual food for the sake of consistency and ease of comparison. For the same reason, all of the numbers and information will be based on the meats being cooked. But now it's time for me to fulfill my promise that we would meet again. Yep, that's the best I got. Let's get to the list. Kicking off this list, beaver meat is an average caloried meat with an impressive micronutrient profile. It's incredibly protein dense, right on the heels of the highest on either list. Gram for gram, beaver meat is the best source of iron on either list, iron being used for the creation of hemoglobin, a protein in your red blood cells that transfers oxygen throughout the body. It's also among the best sources of selenium and phosphorus and a solid contributor of vitamin B6. Beaver meat is also the best source on this list of choline, a nutrient that plays a role in brain function, regulating stuff like memory and mood. It's also a great source of creatine, a compound that supplies energy to your muscles. Now, unlike a lot of very protein-dense meats, beaver also contains a decent amount of fat, about 7%, mainly made up of the monounsaturated oleic acid, the saturated palmitic acid, and the polyunsaturated linoleic acid. Nutrient-wise, the only downside to beaver meat is that it's lower in vitamin B3 than most meats, a nutrient you expect meat to be a reliable source of. You're also going to want your beaver meat to ideally come from a non-polluted environment, as they can sometimes live in some not-so-great places. But if game meats are something that you're up for, and you can get your hands on some safely, nutritionally, beaver meat is an excellent choice that I'm going to put in the top tier. Boar meat is a lower caloried meat with a decent micronutrient profile. This red meat's main micronutrient contributions are B vitamins, notably vitamin B6 and vitamin B12. Boar is also among the best sources on this list of choline and is again a great source of creatine. It's one of the leaner game meats on this list, with most of its fat coming from the monounsaturated oleic acid. Now, unlike most meats on this list, boar is comparatively a poor source of iron, and it can potentially carry harmful bacteria if not prepared properly. But overall, if it's available, boar is a perfectly fine meat that I'm going to put in the B tier. Bologna is a higher caloried spelling abomination of a processed meat with a less than stellar micronutrient profile. Per gram, it's among the best sources on this list of vitamin B1 thiamine. It's a fattier meat option containing mainly oleic acid, palmitic acid, stearic acid, and linoleic acid. These fats are not inherently bad, but in excess don't really contribute to much. But the real problem is that bologna is a processed meat. It was made with the intention of preservation, and has thus been smoked, cured, and swarmed with chemical preservatives that are carcinogenic. It is also excessively sodium dense for those who need to watch out for that. Overall, bologna cannot be called a healthy meat, but I guess it's technically not the worst thing in the world as an occasional treat, thus I'm going to put it in the D tier. Caribou is a lower caloried meat with a quality micronutrient profile. It's the best non-organ source of vitamin B2, which is used in macronutrient metabolism. It's also the best source on either list of zinc, which has a role in many bodily functions, including immune health and metabolism, while being among the best sources of vitamin B12, vitamin B5, and choline. In general, it's just one of the most micro-dense per calorie meats on this list. And because caribou mainly feed on grasses, they tend to have higher omega-3 and conjugated linoleic acid contents for such a lean meat. Speaking of which, caribou is a very lean meat, with most of its fat being oleic acid and palmitic acid. With no real consistent drawbacks to mention and an overall well above average nutrient content, I'm going to put caribou meat in the top tier. Chorizo is a higher caloried processed meat with an average micronutrient profile. For those who don't know, chorizo is a type of pork sausage with some unique seasonings, and it's a decent source of protein and your requisite meat micronutrients. It's still mainly meat after all. But products like chorizo are for the most part defined by their fat, which is in this case mainly oleic acid, palmitic acid, and stearic acid. This results in it being a fairly balanced blend between monounsaturated and saturated fat. And just like all processed meats, chorizo is altered, cured, and full of preservatives associated with cancer risk. And it's also very sodium dense, again for those who need to keep track of that. Again, it's not the absolute worst thing in the world, but chorizo should definitely not be a regular part of your diet, and I'm going to put it in the D tier. Egg whites are a very low-calorie part of a proto-meat, kind of contrived, I know, with a lopsided micronutrient profile. Egg whites are overwhelmingly almost 90% just water. Macronutritionally, they are literally just protein because roughly 2/3 of an egg's protein is in the white, while almost all of the fat is in the yolk. Micronutritionally, egg whites only contribute notable amounts of selenium and vitamin B2 riboflavin. Some of the most common complaints about eggs is the saturated fat and cholesterol, and none of that is in egg whites. Now, quick interjection, I would argue that for the overwhelming number of people, neither of these are really harmful in reasonable amounts, but I digress, you make your own decisions. The real downside is that they are overall just lacking much of their nutritional value compared to whole eggs. But if you're looking for just pure protein, egg whites are about as good as it gets, and I'm going to put them in the B tier. They're just a little too lacking in everything else, and I feel like it would be unfair to put them any higher. Elk is a low-calorie meat with a solid micronutrient profile. It's a very lean protein compared to more common red meats, and it's an excellent source of vitamin B12. And as a red meat, it's a prime example of containing the trio of compounds commonly found in such animals: creatine, carnosine, an antioxidant synthesized from amino acids, and conjugated linoleic acid, a ruminant trans fat shown to aid with fat loss. And the latter of those, CLA, in addition to omega-3s, are more prevalent in elk meat than, say, beef, its direct red meat competition, due to its diet being more commonly grass-fed. And all in all, there's no consistent downsides to elk meat. It's lean and nutritious, and I'm going to put it in the A tier. Emu is an average caloried meat with an exceptional micronutrient profile. It's the best source on either list of vitamin B6, which is needed for brain development and nervous and immune health. And it's the best source on this list of vitamin B12, which is needed to form red blood cells and DNA, selenium, an antioxidant also used to make DNA, vitamin B5, which breaks down fats and carbohydrates into energy, and vitamin B3, another micronutrient responsible for energy metabolism. It's among the best sources of vitamin B2 and zinc as well. I don't know why this big bird is so micro-dense, but it could have something to do with its diet. Emu is arguably the most nutritious meat I've talked about thus far, and on a nutrition tier list, that's going to land it safely in the top tier. Frog legs are a very low-calorie meat with an equivalent micronutrient profile. It's exceptionally lean with a protein-to-fat ratio that puts most meats and poultry to shame. Frog legs are one of the best sources of copper, selenium, and potassium per calorie, and they contain a fair amount of vitamin E, which is unique among meats. Now, it is encouraged to only eat the legs, as the rest has more potential to be dangerous when consumed. But the legs themselves are pretty safe when prepared properly, and they're pretty nutritious, and I'm going to put frog legs in the A tier. Goose is a higher caloried meat with a respectable micronutrient profile. It's among the best sources on this list of phosphorus and is by far the highest in vitamin B5 among poultry meats. In fact, per gram, goose is just consistently more microdense than chicken, its most direct poultry competition. It is, however, much fattier, one of the fattiest natural meats on this list. Most of that fat comes from the usual oleic acid, palmitic acid, stearic acid, and linoleic acid. Overall, there's nothing particularly wrong with goose meat, it's just pretty well rounded, and I'm going to put it in the A tier. Okay, this next one personally feels a little wrong, but horse meat is an average caloried meat with a decent micronutrient profile. It's got a solid vitamin B12 content and is among the best sources on this list of creatine. Horse has a pretty average protein and fat content, with most of that fat being oleic acid and palmitic acid. It is, however, noticeably lower in vitamin B2 than most meats, a nutrient you'd expect to get from said food group. While it's definitely fine, there's nothing that horse meat offers that another meat won't be better at. And its sale and consumption is banned in the States anyway, but I'm here to tell you that there's kind of really no reason to eat it over other better red meats and game meats, and for that I'm going to put it in the B tier. Human meat is nope, we're not doing this one. Kangaroo steak is a lower caloried meat with a solid micronutrient profile per calorie. It is actually the highest protein meat on either list, and it is definitely one of the leanest, making kangaroo meat pretty much just protein incarnate. Of the little fat content it has, it is rich in conjugated linoleic acid and is also rich in the carnosine compound. Kangaroo is also above average in every relevant meat micronutrient with the exception of vitamin B6, where it actually falls a little short. But now I understand why my land down under audience was pushing for this one so much. Kangaroo is great, and I'm going to put it in the top tier. Moose is a low-calorie meat with a great micronutrient profile. It's an exceptionally lean red meat with virtually no fat to speak of. Moose is an excellent source of the all-essential vitamin B12 and among the best sources on this list of choline, carnosine, and creatine. And its micronutrient content is pretty impressive per calorie beyond that. In the end, I just have nothing bad to say about moose meat. It checks all the boxes of what you should expect from meat, and I'm going to put it in the A tier. Ostrich is a lower caloried meat with a pretty impressive micronutrient profile. It's among the best sources of vitamin B12 and selenium. It contains a fair amount of creatine, more than turkey and less than chicken. And it's rich in anserine, a compound shown to improve brain-related blood flow. Now, certain parts of this red meat are very lean, but the fatty parts are mainly made up of oleic acid and palmitic acid. Ostrich is another one of those meats that just provides everything you'd expect, and I'm going to put it in the A tier. Pheasant is a higher caloried meat with a solid micronutrient profile. It is one of the most protein-dense meats on this list, while also being one of the fattiest natural meats as well. Pheasant is among the best sources on this list of vitamin B6, but really the main talking point is the macronutrients, as pheasant is also among the highest in monounsaturated fats of real meats. The most prominent fatty acids being oleic acid, palmitic acid, palmitoleic acid, and linoleic acid. Pheasant meat excels in a lot of ways that matter most, and I'm going to put it in the top tier. Quail is a higher caloried meat with a good micronutrient profile. It's the best non-organ source on this list of copper, which is needed for energy and tissue creation, and it's among the best sources of vitamin B3 and vitamin B6. It also uniquely contains some vitamin A, E, and K, not that much, but it is still fairly uncommon among meats. Quail is also one of the fattiest real meats, and it is the highest in polyunsaturated fat on both lists. The majority of its fatty acid makeup is oleic acid, linoleic acid, palmitic acid, and stearic acid. Quail is also noticeably lower in vitamin B12 than most meats, a nutrient you usually rely on meat to get. But overall, quail is a fine, nutritious choice that I'm going to put in the B tier. Raccoon meat is a higher caloried meat with a solid micronutrient profile. It's the best source on this list of vitamin B1 thiamine, which is used to change carbohydrates into energy. It's also among the best sources of vitamin B2, vitamin B12, iron, and choline. Now, raccoon is one of the fattiest unprocessed meats, with most of it being oleic acid, palmitic acid, linoleic acid, stearic acid, and palmitoleic acid. And you're going to want to make sure to cook and prepare it properly to avoid potential diseases. Overall, raccoon meat is a nutritious choice that I'm going to put in the A tier. Breakfast sausage links are a high-calorie meat with a mediocre micronutrient profile. It has over twice as much fat as protein, with most of the fat being monounsaturated, specifically oleic acid, but also palmitic acid, linoleic acid, and stearic acid. Unfortunately, this type of sausage, beef or pork, is usually highly processed. It contains many additives and preservatives and is associated with several chronic diseases. And on top of that, it's just not nutritious. It is a fine treat to have for breakfast every once in a while and nothing more, and it has earned itself a spot in the D tier. Snail is an interesting low-calorie meat with a unique micronutrient profile. It is the only option on either list to significantly provide vitamin E, an antioxidant known for its heart and skin health benefits. Snail is easily the best source on either list of magnesium, a mineral that plays a role in assisting basically all of the bodily functions. And it's among the best sources of copper, phosphorus, and selenium. It's not very fatty, but of its fat it is a relevant contributor of EPA and the rarer DPA omega-3s, which are most known for combating inflammation and benefiting brain function. The majority of the rest of snail's fat is oleic acid and linoleic acid. Now, it is lower in protein than all natural meats and poultry options on this list. And another thing, do not eat snails raw, as it can lead to some very unpleasant and dangerous infections. But when prepared properly, snail offers several things that no other meat can, and I'm going to put it in the top tier. Spam is a high-calorie processed meat with a less than stellar micronutrient profile. It's a decent source of selenium, but other than that, it's just really fatty. Most of that fat is oleic acid, palmitic acid, stearic acid, and linoleic acid. Unfortunately, Spam is still a processed meat, cured and filled with additives, and it's also excessively sodium dense. I feel this goes without saying, but Spam is not the optimal choice if health is a concern, and I'm going to put it in the D tier. Squirrel meat is an average calorie meat with a solid micronutrient profile. It is very protein dense compared to most meats, and it is among the best sources on this list of vitamin B12, iron, and choline. It's not very fatty, but most of its fat comes from oleic acid and linoleic acid. Overall, squirrel meat has everything that you'd look for in a meat with no real shortcomings, and I'm going to put it in the A tier. Turkey bacon is a very high-calorie meat with a sizable micronutrient profile to match. Per gram, it is the best source on either list of phosphorus, a mineral key to the formation of bones, and potassium, which is needed for cellular fluid balance. It's also among the best sources of vitamin B3 and zinc. But what everyone actually wants to know is how it stacks up against pork bacon. Well, per calorie, turkey bacon excels in every micronutrient comparatively, except for vitamin B1, which pork is just naturally dense in. Turkey bacon is also about 30% less calories and has a better protein to fat ratio. Speaking of fat, the majority of its fat is oleic acid, linoleic acid, palmitic acid, and stearic acid. This makes it the highest in polyunsaturated fat on both lists. Now, turkey bacon is often cured, a process associated with cancer risk, and it is excessively sodium dense, which can cause issues for some people. Many brands also contain added sugars, which is just something to be aware of. Overall, turkey bacon is not what I would consider to be a healthy option, but it definitely has its merit, and I'm going to put it in the C tier. Turkey leg is an average calorie meat with a good micronutrient profile. Comparing it to turkey breast is very reminiscent to comparing chicken white to dark meat. It's among the best sources of selenium and among the highest in poultry creatine. Being a darker meat, it's a bit more caloric due to trading some protein for fat. That fat is mainly oleic acid, linoleic acid, and palmitic acid. Turkey leg is a bit lower in vitamin B12 than most meats, but overall it's a choice that's hard to go wrong with, and I'm going to put it in the A tier. And last on this list, veal is an average calorie meat with a solid micronutrient profile. Being just a younger beef, veal contains a lot of similar compounds. It's a great source of vitamin B12 and is the best source of creatine on this list. It also contains a good amount of choline, conjugated linoleic acid, and carnosine. The majority of veal's fat is oleic acid, palmitic acid, and stearic acid. Now, being less mature, it is generally less protein dense than adult beef, and contains significantly less iron iron than adult beef and most meats for that matter. Ultimately, veal is still a great choice with a couple of notable shortcomings. It's going to round out our list in the B tier. Now, as you guys should have figured out by now, meat is meat. Well, let me specify, unprocessed meat is meat. There's a big difference there. As a whole, meat is nutritious, it just is, and it's going to fill a lot of your nutrition needs better than pretty much anything else on Earth, except for seafood and organs, but those are topics for another day. Arguably, the nicest thing about meat is that when prepared properly, you know what you're going to get from it reliably day in, day out. We had a heavier emphasis on game meats this time around, which I know a lot of people don't really have access to, but there were enough requests from people who do. And the conclusion there was kind of just that they're meat, albeit many of them did have unique benefits, particularly due to them being wild and their diet. If you take anything away from this, it's to not underappreciate meat, as it is a crucial part of many of our lives. Now, if you enjoyed the video, or at the very least learned a little something, I encourage you to subscribe as I've got plenty more of these on the way. Go ahead and let me know down in the comments what other food groups you think I should rank. And remember that all I ask is that you do your own research and advocate for your body. You only get the one.